We'll continue where we left off. Repeat after me, please. Prakashor kasyato yasya, prakashor kasyato yasya, shaityam agner yatoshnata, shaityam agner yatoshnata, swabhava satchidananda, swabhava satchidananda, nitya nirmalatatmanaha, nitya nirmalatatmanaha. In the third line, you see the word swabhava, essential nature. Here, the opening part of the verse gives actually three drishtantas, three metaphors, three examples of swabhava. What examples? In the first line, arkasya, for the sun, the swabhava of the sun is prakasha, light. So arkasya, for the sun, prakashaha, swabhavaha, light is the essential nature. Light is intrinsic to the sun. Toyasya, for water, shaityam, coolness is intrinsic. Coolness is the nature, so assuming you don't artificially heat it up. Water found in nature, for the most part, is cool. Therefore, toyasya, for water, its intrinsic nature, its swabhava is shaityam, coolness. And the last example, yatha, you see the words are run together, agnehe yatha ushnata. Yatha, and just as agnehe, for agni, for fire, the intrinsic nature of fire is ushnata, heat, warmth, hotness. So three examples of swabhava. Swabhava is that which is fundamental, which doesn't change. Briefly, in each one of the three examples, the sun, it always shines. So prakasha, light, is intrinsic. It's the swabhava of the sun. There's no such thing as a dark sun. Even when the clouds cover the sun, even when it's night, in both cases, the sun goes on shining. Therefore, prakasha is intrinsic, it is swabhava for the sun. Similarly, toyasya, for water. Water, when you heat water, that heat comes and goes. It's true, right? If you heat up a cup of water for tea, or if you make a cup of tea, you leave that cup of tea there for an hour, it's cold. So that heat has been added to the water. The heat goes away. Heat comes and goes. The water returns to its cold nature. That coldness is intrinsic to the water. It is swabhava. And final example, agnehe ushnata, the hotness of fire. No such thing as a cold fire. Therefore, heat is intrinsic to fire. These are three examples of swabhava. The point is that which is swabhava never, ever changes. It's always a fact. So here, these three metaphors are metaphors for Atma. Look at the very last word, Atmanaha. For Atma, what is swabhava for Atma is Sat, Chit, Ananda, Nitya, Nirmalata. We have to explain all of that. By the way, that's one long compound word. Satchidananda Nitya Nirmalata is the swabhava Atmanaha of Atma. So let's explain all these words. First of all, Sat, Chit, and Ananda. These words you've heard so many times. Sat, real. Remember our definition of real: unborn, uncreated, unchanging, etc. Chit, consciousness, we've talked about extensively. Consciousness is that which is present in your experience right now, as that because of which you know what's happening right now. And Ananda, it's problematic to translate Ananda as bliss, because bliss is an experience that comes and goes. These three words are revealing the swabhava, the essential nature of Atma. And as we said before, the essential nature, swabhava, intrinsic nature, is that which doesn't change, doesn't come and go. Allow me to be a little bit pedantic. Sat, Chit, and Ananda are not adjectives. You know what an adjective is? Orange cloth. Orange is an adjective that describes a cloth. The key point about adjectives is adjectives can change. You can have a cloth that's white, you can have a cloth that's yellow, you can have a cloth that's any color. So that color of the cloth is an adjective, and adjective is that which can change. So you can have a cloth that is orange, you can have a cloth that is not orange. Look at this. If Sat, Chit, Ananda are adjectives, it means you can have an Atma that is Sat, real. You can also have an Atma that is not Sat, unreal. Wait a minute. That's not Vedanta at all. The word Sat is not an adjective. There's no such thing. So you don't have an option about Atma being Sat or Atma not being Sat. Sat is not an adjective. Sat reveals the swabhava, the true nature. By the way, common adjective for swabhava is swarupa. They mean exactly the same thing. Swabhava, true nature, essential nature. Swarupa, true nature, essential nature. Both of these words are used frequently in Vedanta. So, swabhava doesn't change. So, Sat reveals swabhava. Atma is intrinsically Sat. Similarly, Atma is intrinsically Chit. Chit is not an adjective. There's no such thing as Atma which is not conscious. If Chit were an adjective, you can have either Chit or a-Chit Atma. Not possible. So you get the point. The words Sat and Chit are not adjectives. They reveal the swabhava, the essential nature, the intrinsic nature of Atma. Similarly, Ananda. Now you can see why you can't translate Ananda as bliss without causing confusion, because we all know bliss is an experience that comes and goes. Last night you slept blissfully. I hope you did. But then you woke up and that bliss went away. The experience of bliss comes and goes, like the heat of water comes and goes. Here, we're not talking about bliss at an experiential level. We're talking about bliss at a fundamental level. And at a fundamental level, you can't call it an experience. Experiences come and go. So for that reason, the word Ananda, if to translate it as bliss is problematic. So what else shall we translate it as? By the way, bliss is a literal translation. It's undeniable. Nand is the root. Nand is to rejoice. So Ananda is full of rejoicing. Bliss is a perfect translation. But when we use the word Ananda, in the expression Satchidananda, to refer to Atma, in this limited case, to translate Ananda as bliss is problematic. Then what word shall we use? My guru, Pujya Swami Tadatmananda, was fond of using the word fullness. or completeness. Others will use words like perfection or divinity. Words are words. Use whatever words you want. But the point is that all of these words refer to the essence of Atma. Commentators will often, when they say Sat Chit Ananda in a commentary, they'll often say Sat Chit Ananda. No, I'm sorry, the other way around. Sat Chit Ananta Ananda. Or maybe the other way, I don't know. But they'll add the word Ananta to the word Ananda. Ananta means limitless. So Ananta then, the word limitless, gives you a better sense of what the word Ananda is intended to convey here. A limitlessness. Ananda is limitlessness. That's a very, it's not a literal translation, but it's absolutely accurate in terms of the teachings of Vedanta, in terms of the teachings of Śaṅkarācāryaḥ. Ananda, when used to describe Atma, is not an adjective. It's not an experience of bliss. When the word Ananda is used to describe Atma, it means limitlessness, or as my guru said, fullness, completeness. Okay, we have two more words here, nitya, eternal, and nirmalata, purity. And almost it looks like these two words should go together, nitya, nirmalata. Nirmalata, purity, which is nitya, eternal, unchanging. Unchanging purity. And that's a very important expression. Notice this crystal has nitya nirmalata. I don't know, nitya, eternal. This crystal is not exactly eternal, but follow, in staying with the metaphor, the clearness of this crystal, nirmalata, purity, clarity, clearness. The clearness of this crystal is nitya in the sense that it doesn't come and go. And here's the point. Just as this crystal, the clearness of this crystal is intrinsic to the crystal, it doesn't come and go. In the same way, for Atma, Atmanaha, what is intrinsic to Atma is nitya nirmalata, unchanging purity. Now, what that means is that just as the crystal is never tainted by the color of my cloth, there's not a trace, we've discussed this before, not a trace of orangeness goes into the crystal. It's only visual thing, it's only an appearance. In the same way, when sadness is present in your mind or any other emotion, not a trace of that sadness affects your consciousness. This is crucial to the teachings of Vedanta. And this is crucial to becoming enlightened and becoming free from suffering, because it's only when you understand your true nature to be nitya nirmalata, your essential nature, your svabhava is Satchidananda. We've explained these words many times, but Satchidananda, which is unchangingly pure, eternally untainted, unchanging, meaning your consciousness remains limitless, full, complete, regardless of the condition of your mind. No matter how much agitation is in your mind, consciousness is unaffected. No matter how much sadness, anger, frustration, whatever is the emotion, all of that In the presence of all of that, consciousness remains utterly untainted, utterly unchanged, just like the crystal. Now, there's a really important point. A little bit outside of our text, but so important. Please note that the clear crystal is not a matter of experience. As long as I hold this crystal in front of the cloth, it will continue to appear orange. Therefore, to appreciate the clarity of this crystal is not experiential. The word used, and this word was used by Pujya Swami Tadatmananda, he said, it is purely cognitive. It's purely a matter of understanding. Watch where this goes. Extremely important. Your consciousness remains utterly untainted, unaffected by sadness, anger, frustration, whatever it is in your mind. Consciousness remains utterly unaffected, and that truth is purely cognitive, to use Pujya Swami Dayananda's language. Purely cognitive means you don't necessarily experience freedom from the sadness in your mind. You don't, when you understand that the crystal is clear, that doesn't change your experience. In the same way, when you understand that your true nature, svabhava, is utterly unaffected by whatever is happening in your mind, that doesn't change your experience. When sadness is in your mind, you will continue to experience sadness. What Vedanta gives you is a cognitive shift. Cognitive, fancy language. Cognitive shift means it's a matter of understanding that I am fundamentally okay in spite of the presence of the experience of sadness. This is the cognitive shift. I'll say that one more time. To know that I am okay, I'll use second person. You are okay, perfectly unaffected, regardless of the condition of your mind. That's purely a matter of understanding, and it is this particular understanding that gives you inner freedom. Because if you know you're okay, regardless of the condition of the mind, then it's okay. Let the mind be what it is. Okay, the mind is sad, the mind is agitated, the mind is up, down, sideways, whatever it is, to know that you are okay no matter what. This is Vedanta. And it is, again, to go back to Pujya Swamiji's words, purely cognitive. And the reason I'm stressing this is in some other traditions, they take a very different approach. For example, in the tradition of yoga, now when I use the word yoga here, I'm specifically referring to the yoga based on the Yoga Sutras of the Rishi Patanjali, the source scripture for all yoga. In that school of thought called yoga, attributed to Patanjali, we call it Yoga Darshana, the school of thought called yoga. In that school of thought, their goal is almost identical to the goal we seek in Vedanta. And the goal we seek in Vedanta we call moksha, freedom, liberation. They call it kaivalyam. Kaivalyam means literally onlyness, but what it means is a condition of being utterly unaffected by anything and everything. A condition of being only yourself as Satchidananda without being affected by anything else. Now watch this. In the school of thought known as yoga, they focus on creating a special condition of your mind when your mind is free from creating any disturbance. Which means to enjoy kaivalya, the goal of yoga, you require a mind that's in a particular condition. They call it nirodha, the cessation of all thoughts. And I don't want to get into the technical details. There's a lot of details here. So let me make the point in general. Yoga focuses on the condition of the mind, creating a condition of the mind in which suffering goes away. And they have a very elaborate methodology of doing that, a methodology based partially on Vedantic teachings, but largely based on practice of meditation. So with the help of this wisdom, same knowledge that we're studying is the same knowledge that they adhere to, the knowledge of Atma. Their understanding of Atma is pretty much the same as Vedanta's understanding of Atma. But their solution to the problem of suffering is very different. The yogic solution to the problem of suffering is to create a permanent condition of mind, a condition that is permanently free from suffering. The Vedantic solution to the problem of suffering is to understand that your swabhava, your intrinsic nature, is innately free from suffering regardless of the condition of the mind. See how different these perspectives are? Yoga takes the mind very seriously and works to modify and control that mind. In fact, one of the main meanings for yoga is control. It also means union, but a primary meaning of the word yoga is to control. So yoga is primarily concerned with controlling the mind. Vedanta, certainly we recognize that control of the mind is necessary to a point, but the ultimate goal is not found through controlling the mind, but to use the word we used in the last class, the goal in Vedanta is achieved through discernment with regard to the mind. Not control of the mind, but discernment, viveka, with regard to the mind, to know that whatever happens in the mind affects the mind and doesn't affect you, your true nature as Satchidananda Atma. This is so that when you understand the difference, it's very stark. The focus in yoga is to control the mind. The focus in Atma, in Vedanta, is to discern the difference between you and the mind and to know clearly and firmly that whatever happens in the mind doesn't affect you. Now, this is not a small issue. It's not a little pedantic feature. This is so significant. Look at the... I don't want to spend too long on this point, but it's really important. I'm smiling remembering some of Puja Swami Dayananda's teachings. By the way, it's now we just celebrated the 5th anniversary of his Mahasamadhi. So I still remember him very fondly and miss him deeply. He taught, he had a nice expression here. He said, if your mind needs to be in a certain state for you to be free, to be content, to enjoy perfect peace, if your mind has to be in a certain condition for you to enjoy perfect peace, then, in my teacher's, I don't remember his exact words, but something like this, you will continue to struggle with that mind. And in this way, you make an enemy of your own mind. His exact words. You make an enemy, an opponent, an enemy of your mind. Why? Because you want your mind to be in that perfect condition so you can enjoy peace. Your mind, I think we've discussed in this class before, your mind resists perfection. Just as you can't perfect your physical body, I did give this example. If you go to the gym and work out for 8 hours a day, how long will it take you to have a perfect body? Silly, right? Your body can become much healthier, much stronger. It can never be perfect. The body is not perfectible, and nor is your mind perfectible. We can improve the mind tremendously. And the yogic practices, the meditations taught in yoga, are very powerful in shaping that mind and making that mind much healthier. But that mind will never be perfected. This is our Vedantic perspective. In yoga, this is a Vedantic interpretation of yoga, and that is, in yoga, you try to perfect the imperfectible, the unperfectible. I'm not sure if that's a word. You try to make perfect a mind which can never be perfect. And that struggle to make your imperfect mind perfect, that struggle converts your mind into an opponent, an enemy you have to struggle with constantly. And the fact is, we have too many enemies in life already. You don't need to make your mind one more enemy. Some of Pujya Swamiji's observations. I should mention before we wrap up this topic that not only does yoga have this orientation, but some of you are familiar with a scripture called Yoga Vasishta. Yoga Vasishta is loosely a text on Vedanta, as is Śaṅkarācāryaḥ's Ātma-bodha. Yoga Vasishta is attributed to the sage Valmiki. It's a huge text, some 25,000 verses long, and it's basically an account of Lord Rama being taught by the sage Vasishta, which is where its name comes from. And a lot of quasi-Vedantic teachings come in that Yoga Vasishta. Why do I say quasi-Vedanta? Because Yoga Vasishta follows in the footsteps of yoga, which is to say, the Vedanta taught in the Yoga Vasishta ends up requiring a particular condition of mind for you to enjoy perfect peace. To have perfect peace is contingent upon a particular condition of your mind, which means knowledge is not enough. In Vedanta, knowledge is enough. Discernment. When you discern that whatever happens in the mind belongs to the mind. When I say that, I'm reminded there's a advertising thing, you may have heard this. Whatever happens in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas. It's actually not a very nice thing to say. It kind of gives you the sense that whatever immoral things you do in Las Vegas stays there and doesn't affect you when you come back, which is kind of wrong. Anyway, it's an advertising slogan. Whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Whatever happens in your mind stays in your mind and doesn't affect consciousness. This is discernment. This is the result of knowledge. Tattva jnana, knowledge of your true nature. Yoga Vasishta agrees that tattva jnana, knowledge of reality, is required, but it's not enough. According to Yoga Vasishta, this discernment or pure knowledge is not enough. They take 2 more steps. I'm not going to go into these details. 2 more steps in bringing the mind into a particular condition where you can enjoy perfect peace. So trying to perfect the mind. This is a goal in yoga, perfecting the mind. It's a goal in Vedanta, as taught in Yoga Vasishta, perfecting the mind. And as, just to conclude this, to attempt to make perfect that which is inherently imperfect, you can just get the sense of how frustrating that would be. Which is why it's so important that the approach of Advaita Vedanta, as taught by Śaṅkarācāryaḥ, as taught by Puja Swami Dayananda and all the great teachers, the approach of Vedanta is let the mind be imperfect. As long as you have perfect knowledge, discernment must be perfect. Your mind can be imperfect. Your mind will be imperfect. My mind is imperfect. Every mind is imperfect. Puja Swami Dayananda once said, and this is an exact quote, he said, "You don't know how silly my mind can be sometimes." Look at that statement. You don't know how silly my mind can be sometimes. This is a statement of a great Mahatma. He could let his mind be silly because he knew that silliness belongs to the mind. He had perfect, not a perfect mind, perfect knowledge, perfect discernment. With perfect discernment, you are completely free from the silliness of your mind. Completely free means you remain utterly at peace and totally unaffected regardless of the condition of your mind. This is such a crucial point, which is why we spent some time on it. I have one note here, just to show another way of looking at the difference of these 2 approaches. So we're talking about superimposition. So all of this, like orangeness is superimposed on the crystal, all of these mental conditions are superimposed on Atma. Another example of superimposition, which you know very well, is the snake gets superimposed on the rope. You know the story. In a dark alley, a coiled rope looks like a snake. You mentally superimpose a snake on the rope. And that becomes very frightening. And here's the point. Where is the necessity of killing the snake? You don't need to kill the snake. There is no snake to bother you. In the same way, the snake is not your enemy. You don't need to kill it. Your mind is not your enemy. You don't need to try to make that mind perfect. Once again, you don't need a perfect mind. You need perfect discernment, perfect understanding, perfect vidya, knowledge, perfect bodha, Ātma-bodha, self-knowledge. That can be perfect. Okay, let us continue. Ātmana satchidam shascha, Ātmana satchidam shascha, buddhir vrittiriti dvayam, buddhir vrittiriti dvayam, samyojya cha vivekena, chayojam cha vivekena, janamiti pravartate, janamiti pravartate. Let me introduce the verse with a leading question. commentaries will often introduce a verse with these leading questions. And here the leading question is, if Atma is unchanging, and that unchanging consciousness, Atma is unchanging consciousness, and that unchanging consciousness is your essential nature, your swabhava, your intrinsic nature. But if your intrinsic nature is unchanging consciousness, then why do we feel like we are constantly changing? We are individual beings in contact with the world, having many experiences, and we change depending on the experience. If we experience a bright sunny day, we feel cheery. If we experience a gloomy rainy day, we may not feel so cheery. So through all of our experiences, we seem to change, constantly change. How do we reconcile the fact that Atma is unchanging consciousness, but our experience of ourselves is constantly changing? How to reconcile that? Śaṅkarācāryaḥ explains. He says that there, in the second line, iti dvayam, there are two factors that we need to understand here. Two factors, just as with a crystal, there are two factors. One factor is the clear crystal, and the other factor is the orange cloth. Two factors. So the same two factors. One factor is Atmanaha Satchidamshaha. One of the two factors is the Sat and Chit Amsha. Shankara is getting a little complicated here, but we won't, it's not that complicated. Amsha means part. So he says that Atma has a Sat Amsha, a Sat part, and Atma has a Chit Amsha, a Chit part. Of course, you already know Atma doesn't have parts, so this word Amsha is used figuratively. The commentator points that out. He says, Amshaha iva. It is as though a part. Maybe instead of calling it part, we can call it aspect. Remember, Sat, Chit, and Ananda are not adjectives. These refer to the intrinsic nature, swabhava of Atma. So we can speak of a Sat aspect, the real aspect, and the Chit aspect, the conscious aspect. So with regards to these two aspects, the aspect of Atma, your true nature, the aspect which is real, uncreated, unborn, unchanging, and the aspect which is Chit, conscious, revealing all your experiences. And these two aspects are Atmanaha, they belong to Atma. This is one of the two factors. So one of the two factors is two factors, sorry about that. Two factors, so to speak, Sat and Chit. Anyway, so Sat Chit, the Atma, looked upon as being Sat and Chit, is one of the two factors. What is the other factor? Buddhehe vrittihi. We've used that word vritti before. Vritti means thought modification, the movements of your mind. A good translation is mental activity. And please note, mental activities includes your thoughts, mental activities include your emotions, and mental activities includes everything you perceive, everything you see, hear, taste, touch, or smell. All of these are mental activities. All of these are vrittis, and all of these are buddhehe. They belong to your buddhi. They belong to your mind. So these are the two factors. One is Atma, the Sat and Chit aspects of Atma, and the other is the activities of your mind. And just so we stay a little grounded in our metaphors, so here we have the two aspects, a clear crystal and orange cloth. This represents the two aspects. Sat Chit Atma, the true self, is like the clear crystal. Satchidatma is like the clear crystal. And buddhehi vritti, the activities of your mind, are like the orangeness of the cloth. The cloth represents your mind, and the orangeness represents the condition of your mind, like sadness, or whatever is the emotion, or whatever it is in your mind. So these are the two factors. The crystal, which is clear, representing Sat, Chit, Atma, and the orange cloth representing the condition of your mind. Orange cloth represents condition of your mind. These are the two factors, iti dvayam. What about these two factors? Dvayam samyojya. When you put these two factors together, samyojya, combining these two factors together, avivekena. Viveka, remember that word, we've translated many times as discernment. Avivekena, due to the absence of discernment. Avivekena, due to the absence of discernment, when you samyojya, when you combine dvayam, these two factors, satchidananda, satchit atma, is combined with the condition of your mind, just like the clear crystal is combined with the orangeness of this cloth, then what? Avivekena, due to non-discernment, what happens is you make a wrong conclusion. What is a wrong conclusion? The crystal is orange. A wrong conclusion is born of the absence of discernment between these two factors. In the same way, avivekena, due to the absence of discernment, samyojya, when satchidatma, fancy term, your consciousness, your fundamental essential nature as a conscious being. Your consciousness right now illumines whatever's happening in your mind, all of your thoughts, emotions, perceptions. In that way, samyojya, they are put together. Just as a crystal is put in front of the cloth, in the same way, your consciousness is in the presence, other way around. Your mind is in the presence of consciousness. Your mind is illumined by consciousness. That's samyojya. That's when they are connected, when they are in each other's presence. Then what happens? Avivekena, is the words break it apart. Cha and avivekena. Due to the absence of discernment, what happens? Janami iti pravartate. Pravartate. What takes place in your mind is a thought. The word iti here is indicating a particular thought. And what is the thought that happens in your mind? Janami. Some of you know. Janami is a Sanskrit verb meaning I know. I know. I know what's happening around me. I know what's happening in my mind. Who says, I know? Who makes that conclusion? I know what's happening around me in the room. Who says, does that statement, I know, does it come from, we have these two factors, does it come from consciousness or does it come from mind? This is tricky. Watch this. Watch very carefully. Who comes to the conclusion, I know what's happening right now? Janami. Who draws that conclusion? Does consciousness draw that conclusion or does the mind draw that conclusion? The answer is neither. Look at that. Consciousness doesn't think. Remember, consciousness reveals the thoughts in your mind. So consciousness doesn't consciously think, I know. Consciousness reveals the thought, I know, the thought, I know, that arises in your mind. But a little tricky now, and that is your mind, in the absence of consciousness, your mind can't know anything. All knowing is due to consciousness. Without consciousness, there's no sentiency. Without consciousness, there's no possibility of knowing anything whatsoever. So look at this as what they call a conundrum. It's a problem. So who says, I know? I know what's happening right now. Consciousness doesn't come to that conclusion. I know what's happening right now. And your mind, in the absence of consciousness, can't know anything at all. But samyoja, when these two factors are put together, then there arises a particular thought. A thought that says, I know what's happening right now. That's a thought. That thought, I know what's happening right now, that thought belongs to your mind. That thought is illumined by consciousness. That thought is a very important thought. We have a special name for the thought that says I, the I thought. The I thought we call ahankara. Ahankara, Sanskrit word, literally means that which makes the feeling of aham, I, the source, the origin of the feeling of being an individual person. Let me spend a few minutes at the end of this class explaining what is ahankara, because that's what Śaṅkara wants us to understand here. And that is when you put these two factors together, consciousness plus mind, what arises is something very surprising. What arises is this ahankara, this thought of I thought is a literal translation, feeling of I-ness, sense of individuality. In order to help you understand what it is, it's helpful to contrast it with its absence. Try this. Remember a time when you were listening to music or some other experience, and it was such your favorite kind of music, and it was such a wonderful and overwhelming experience, you felt yourself getting lost in the music. You may have had that experience or something like that. The experience of being lost in music. Watch this. Who gets lost in the music? When you're lost in the music, can you still hear the music? Of course. So the music is still present in consciousness. Consciousness remains present when you say, I got lost in the music. Who is it that got lost is not consciousness. The one that gets lost in the in the music is that ahankara, that sense of individuality. Often gets translated as ego. Ego also gets, the word ahankara also gets conflated with Hindi ahankar in a sense of pride. Anyway, we're using the word ahankara as a technical term here, or if we use the word ego, we're using it as a technical term, not in a sense of pride. We're using it to indicate that sense of feeling like you are an individual person, that sense that goes away when you're lost in the music. That sense is the ahankara ego. It comes and goes. It's also absent in deep sleep, dreamless sleep. In dreamless sleep, you don't feel like, oh, I am really deeply asleep. You don't have that experience. That I thought is absent in deep sleep. That I thought, ahankara, is absent when you're lost in the music, absent in certain kinds of samadhi. We won't go into the details now. That I thought arises samyojya dvayam, when these two factors are brought together. When consciousness is brought to, other way around. When the mind is in the presence of consciousness, when these two factors are together, there arises this I thought. This I thought is the most amazing thing. It's a thought that masquerades as being a conscious being. It's an imposter. When that thought comes, I know what's happening right now, the real knower is consciousness, correct? When you say, I know what's happening right now, the real knower of what's happening right now is consciousness. But that thought, I know what's happening right now, that thought is not consciousness speaking. That thought is your mind. So that thought, I know what's happening right now, that thought is a thought masquerading as consciousness, pretending to be a conscious being. It's only a thought, and that I thought is the focal point of the problem of suffering. When these two factors are brought together, mind is in the presence of consciousness, there arises the I thought, and there, I know what's happening right now. I know that I'm sad. Look what happens. I know the sadness in my mind becomes I am sad due to the absence of discernment. If I say, I know the presence of sadness in my mind, and I have perfect discernment, I know that sadness belongs to my mind, I know that my consciousness is utterly unaffected by that sadness, there's no suffering in that. But in the absence of discernment, I say, I know the presence of sadness in my mind, therefore I am sad. That's the absence of discernment. That's the root of suffering. In the next verse, we'll talk more about this ahankara. In the meanwhile, some time ago, I did a video on ahankara, ego. I think it's called An Intimate Conversation with Your Ego, or something like that. An intimate conversation with your ego. If you have the time, go watch that video. It'll help you understand what is ahankara much better, and then you'll understand this discussion better, and you'll be in good shape for the next class. We'll come back to this and understand how that ahankara is the focal point of the problem of suffering. We'll talk about that in our next class. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya Om Shanti 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 Om Tat Sat.